Brianna Lawson's phone buzzed with an incoming call at precisely 5:47 a.m., jarring her awake from a rare, peaceful sleep. The illuminated screen displayed Harrison Museum of Modern Art, and despite the ungodly hour, she knew she couldn't ignore it. As the city's most sought-after event planner, early morning emergencies were part of the job description. "Brianna speaking," she answered, her voice still husky from sleep. "Miss Lawson, it's Edward Harrison." The deep, authoritative voice on the other end needed no introduction. Edward Harrison was not only the founder of the Harrison Museum of Modern Art, but one of the wealthiest art collectors in the country. "I need you in my office at 9 this morning. My annual gala needs a new planner, and you come highly recommended." Brianna sat up straight, suddenly wide awake. The Harrison Gala was the event of the season, known for its extravagance and the elite guest list it attracted. Planning it would catapult her career to new heights. "I'll be there, Mr. Harrison," she replied, already mentally rearranging her schedule for the day. "Good. My assistant will email you the details." The line went dead without further pleasantries. Brianna flopped back on her bed, heart racing. At 32, after years of working her way up through the cutthroat New York event planning industry, this was the opportunity she'd been waiting for. Her boutique agency, Lawson Events, had built a solid reputation for creative excellence, but landing the Harrison Gala would put her in a whole new league. By 8:45 a.m., Brianna was striding through the imposing glass doors of the Harrison Museum, a striking modernist building in the heart of Manhattan. Her cream silk blouse and tailored navy suit projected the professional confidence she needed, even if her stomach was tied in knots. The receptionist directed her to the top floor, where Edward Harrison's office overlooked Central Park. As the elevator ascended, Brianna reviewed what she knew about the Harrison family. Edward, in his 70s, had built his fortune in international shipping before turning his passion for contemporary art into one of the country's most prestigious private collections, eventually establishing the museum 15 years ago. He was a widower with one son who reportedly worked in the family business but kept a low profile. When the elevator doors opened, Brianna was greeted by a stern-looking assistant who led her down a hallway lined with museum-quality artwork. "Mr. Harrison is finishing a call." "Please wait here," the woman said, gesturing to a minimalist seating area outside a set of double doors. Brianna sat, smoothing invisible wrinkles from her skirt. A few minutes later, the doors opened and a tall man in his late 30s emerged, speaking rapidly on his phone. He was impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that screamed bespoke tailoring, his dark hair slightly tousled as if he'd run his hand through it multiple times. "I don't care what they're offering, the answer is still no," he said firmly, barely glancing in Brianna's direction as he passed. Something about his commanding presence made Brianna stare a moment too long. He must have felt her gaze because he paused, turned, and for a brief moment, their eyes met. His were an unusual shade of gray-blue, framed by dark lashes. A flicker of something curiosity perhaps crossed his features before he nodded slightly and continued down the hallway. "Miss Lawson, Mr. Harrison will see you now," the assistant announced, interrupting Brianna's thoughts. Edward Harrison's office was a minimalist showcase of art and architecture. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the city, while carefully positioned sculptures and paintings transformed the space into a private gallery. The man himself sat behind a glass desk, his silver hair and sharp eyes giving him the appearance of an eagle perched on high. "Sit," he commanded, gesturing to the chair across from him. "I'll be direct, Miss Lawson. Our previous planner quit with less than 3 months until the gala." I need someone who can handle pressure, maintain our standards, and bring fresh ideas. The Harrison Gala isn't just a fundraiser, it's a statement. Brianna nodded, maintaining eye contact. I understand completely, Mr. Harrison. May I ask what theme you had in mind for this year? Transitions, he replied. The museum is entering a new era. I'm beginning to step back, and my son Oliver will be taking a more prominent role. The gala should reflect this changing of the guard while honoring our history. Oliver Harrison. The name finally connected to the man she'd seen leaving the office. She'd read about him occasionally in business publications, but he wasn't a fixture in society pages like many heirs to vast fortunes. That's a compelling narrative, Brianna said. I'd envisioned something that bridges classical and contemporary, perhaps installations that transform throughout the evening, representing the evolution of both art and leadership. A ghost of a smile crossed Edward's face. That's why you're here, Miss Lawson. I've seen your work at the Guggenheim benefit last fall. You understand subtlety and symbolism, not just spectacle. For the next hour, they discussed logistics, budget, which was substantial, and expectations, which were even more substantial. Edward was demanding but fair, with clear ideas about what he wanted but open to Brianna's expertise. One last thing, Edward said as their meeting concluded. My son Oliver will be your primary contact on this project. He has final approval on all decisions. I trust you'll work well together. Brianna managed to keep her expression neutral despite her surprise. Of course, I look forward to collaborating with him. Edward stood, signaling the end of their meeting. My assistant will provide you with all necessary files and contacts. I expect weekly updates. He extended his hand. Don't disappoint me, Miss Lawson. I won't, she promised, shaking his hand firmly. As Brianna gathered her materials to leave, Edward's phone rang. He glanced at it and frowned. That's Oliver now. Stay a moment, he should meet you properly. A few minutes later, the door opened, and Oliver Harrison walked in, his presence immediately filling the room. Up close, Brianna could see the resemblance to his father, same strong jaw and intense eyes, though Oliver's features were softened by youth and warmth his father lacked. You wanted to see me, Dad? Oliver asked before noticing Brianna. Recognition flickered across his face. Sorry, I didn't realize you were in a meeting. This is Brianna Lawson, our new gala planner, Edward introduced her. You'll be working closely together over the next few months. Oliver extended his hand, his grip warm and firm. Oliver Harrison. I apologize for not introducing myself earlier in the hallway. No apology necessary, Brianna replied, acutely aware of the electricity that seemed to pass between them when their hands touched. She quickly withdrew hers, maintaining professional composure. Miss Lawson has some excellent initial ideas for the transitions theme, Edward said. I've told her you'll have final approval on all plans. Oliver raised an eyebrow. That's a change from previous years. As I said, transitions, Edward replied dryly. I have a board meeting. You two should discuss next steps. With that, he gathered his papers and left them alone in the vast office. An awkward silence followed his departure. Oliver walked to the window, hands in his pockets. My father can be intense, he finally said. Most successful people are, Brianna replied diplomatically. Oliver turned, studying her with those penetrating eyes. And you, are you intense, Miss Lawson? Brianna, please. And yes, when the situation calls for it. She met his gaze steadily. I take my work very seriously. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Good, so do I, though you wouldn't know it from the society pages, which seem to think I spend my time exclusively on yachts and at polo matches. I don't put much stock in society pages, Brianna said. I prefer to form my own impressions. And what's your impression so far? he asked, his tone lighter but his eyes still intense. Brianna considered her response carefully. That you care deeply about your father's legacy and this museum, and that you're more involved in its operations than the public might realize. Oliver looked genuinely pleased by her assessment. Accurate on all counts. I've been running the business side of both the shipping company and the museum for years, just without the public-facing role my father enjoys. He moved to sit on the edge of the desk, closer to her chair. So, tell me about these ideas my father mentioned. For the next 30 minutes, they discussed the gala. Oliver was sharp and engaged, asking intelligent questions and offering thoughtful suggestions. Brianna found herself enjoying their exchange, impressed by his knowledge of both art and event logistics. You seem to know a lot about event planning, she observed. I've attended enough galas to know what works and what doesn't, he replied. Plus, I have a personal interest in making this one particularly special. Before she could ask what he meant, his phone buzzed. He checked it and sighed. I'm afraid I need to take this, but I'd like to continue our discussion. Are you free for dinner tomorrow? We could meet at Lawrence at 7. Brianna hesitated. Lawrence was one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city, definitely not the kind of place where strictly professional meetings typically occurred. Reading her hesitation, Oliver added, to discuss the gala, of course. I find it easier to talk creative concepts outside the office. Of course, Brianna agreed, keeping her tone professional despite the flutter in her stomach. I'll bring my preliminary sketches and timeline. Perfect. He stood and opened the door for her. Until tomorrow, then. As Brianna rode the elevator down to the lobby, she couldn't help wondering if she'd imagined the spark between them. Oliver Harrison was undeniably attractive, but he was also her client and the son of one of the most influential men in New York. Getting personally involved would be professional suicide. Yet as she stepped out into the crisp autumn air, Brianna couldn't deny the excitement she felt about seeing him again tomorrow, an excitement that went beyond professional opportunity. What she didn't know was that Oliver Harrison was standing at his father's office window, watching her exit the building, a smile playing on his lips as he formulated a plan that went far beyond a museum gala. The next evening, Brianna arrived at Lawrence precisely at 7, clutching her portfolio and trying to ignore the butterflies in her stomach. She'd spent hours agonizing over what to wear, finally settling on a burgundy wrap dress that struck the perfect balance between professional and elegant. The maitre d' led her through the dimly lit restaurant, past tables of New York's elite, to a secluded corner where Oliver was already waiting. He stood as she approached, and Brianna couldn't help but notice how his tailored navy suit accentuated his broad shoulders and tall frame. "Brianna," he greeted her, his voice warm. "Thank you for joining me." "Thank you for the invitation," she replied, taking the seat a waiter pulled out for her. "This place is impossible to get into on short notice." Oliver smiled. "One of the few perks of the Harrison name I actually use." He gestured to the portfolio she'd placed on the table. "But I see you came prepared to work. Of course, that's why we're here, isn't it?" Brianna kept her tone light but professional. A flicker of amusement crossed Oliver's face. "Absolutely, though perhaps we could order first. The chef here does amazing things with seafood." They settled into easy conversation as they perused the menus. Oliver asked thoughtful questions about Brianna's background and how she'd gotten into event planning. She found herself sharing more than she typically would with clients about growing up in Boston with parents who taught literature at different universities, about moving to New York right after college with dreams of working in the arts. "So, how did you go from art history major to event planner?" Oliver asked as their appetizers arrived. Brianna laughed. "By accident, really. I took a job at the Metropolitan Museum's development office to pay the bills while I figured out my next steps. They needed someone to help with a donor event, and I volunteered. Turns out, I had a knack for it, seeing all the moving pieces, creating experiences that tell stories. That makes perfect sense, Oliver said. The best events are like works of art themselves. They evoke emotion, create meaning. Exactly. Brianna was pleasantly surprised by his understanding. What about you? Did you always know you'd join the family business? Something complicated passed across Oliver's face. Not exactly. I studied architecture at Yale, actually. I wanted to design buildings, not just fill them with art or shipping containers. What changed? My mother died when I was in graduate school, he said quietly. Cancer. It hit my father hard. I took a semester off to help with the business and somehow never went back. That was 10 years ago. I'm sorry, Brianna said sincerely. Do you regret it? Oliver considered her question, swirling the wine in his glass. Sometimes, but I've found ways to incorporate my passion into what I do. I've overseen the renovation of several of our properties, designed our Singapore office from scratch. He shrugged. Life rarely follows the path we imagine, does it? No, Brianna agreed, thinking of her own winding career path. But sometimes the unexpected turns lead somewhere better. Their eyes met across the table, and for a moment neither spoke. Oliver was the first to break the silence. We should probably discuss the gala at some point, he said with a small smile, before my father accuses me of wasting company time. Brianna laughed, grateful for the return to professional territory. She opened her portfolio and began outlining her vision for transforming the museum's grand hall into an immersive experience that would represent the museum's past, present, and future. I'm thinking of 3 distinct zones, she explained, showing him her sketches. The past section would feature classical elements with modern twists, perhaps projections of the museum's most iconic exhibitions over the years. The present would showcase current exhibitions but with interactive elements. And the future? She hesitated. What's your idea for the future? Oliver prompted. That's where I'd like your input. It should represent your vision for where the museum is headed. Oliver studied her for a moment. You've done your research. It's my job to understand what matters to my clients, Brianna replied. And what do you think matters to me? The question felt weighted with meaning beyond the professional context. Brianna chose her words carefully. I think you care about honoring your father's legacy while creating your own, making the museum more accessible without compromising its artistic integrity, building something that lasts. Oliver sat back, expression unreadable. You're good at reading people, Brianna. Not always, she admitted, but I try to pay attention. To answer your question about the future section, Oliver said, leaning forward, I want it to be about connection. Art connecting to technology. The museum connecting to communities that have traditionally been excluded from spaces like ours. Different artistic traditions connecting across cultures. As he spoke, his passion was evident, and Brianna found herself captivated not just by his ideas but by the man himself. They spent the next hour deep in conversation about the gala, building on each other's ideas with an ease that felt almost like creative telepathy. By the time dessert arrived, a chocolate souffle they agreed to share, Brianna had filled several pages with notes and sketches. This is going to be spectacular, Oliver said, reviewing her latest drawing. You've managed to capture exactly what I envisioned, but better. It's just the beginning, Brianna replied, pleased by his enthusiasm. There's still so much to do, vendors to contract, invitations to design, the guest list to finalize. About that, Oliver interrupted, his tone shifting slightly. I'd like to make some adjustments to the usual guest list. Add some new names, particularly from the tech world and international art scene. That makes sense, given your emphasis on connection, Brianna nodded. Just send me your additions and I'll incorporate them. Oliver hesitated. There's one other change I'd like to make. Something more significant. Oh, the gala has always been in November, but I'd like to move it to December this year. The week before Christmas, specifically. Brianna frowned. That's only 6 weeks away and right in the middle of holiday season. The logistics would be incredibly challenging. May I ask why? Oliver seemed to choose his words carefully. Let's just say I have something special planned and the timing is important. Something beyond the museum transition, Brianna pressed, sensing there was more to the story. Yes, Oliver admitted. Something personal. I can't share the details yet, but I promise it will make sense eventually. Brianna felt a strange pang of disappointment at the word personal, wondering if it involved someone special in Oliver's life. She quickly pushed the thought aside. His personal life was none of her business. If you're set on December, we'll need to move quickly, she said, refocusing on the professional challenge. Availability for everything from catering to entertainment will be limited. Money isn't an issue, Oliver assured her, and I'll personally make calls if needed to secure what we want. All right then, Brianna agreed, making a note of the new date. December it is. Their dinner wrapped up shortly after, with Oliver insisting on driving her home despite her protests that a taxi would be fine. His black Aston Martin pulled up to the curb, and Brianna couldn't help but be impressed. Beautiful car, she commented as he held the door for her. Thank you. It's one of my few indulgences, Oliver replied. I'm actually more of a motorcycle guy typically, but that's not very practical for New York winters. As they drove through the city, Brianna gave directions to her Brooklyn Heights apartment. The conversation flowed easily, touching on their favorite places in the city, books they'd read recently, and their shared love of obscure documentary films. By the time they arrived at her building, Brianna was reluctantly admitting to herself that she was attracted to Oliver Harrison not just physically, but intellectually and emotionally. The realization was both thrilling and concerning. She had a strict policy against mixing business with pleasure, especially with clients as high-profile as the Harrisons. Oliver parked and came around to open her door. "Thank you for a productive evening," he said as they walked to her building entrance. "I haven't enjoyed a business dinner this much in." "Well, ever," Brianna smiled. "Neither have I. We make a good team." "We do," Oliver agreed, his eyes lingering on hers a moment too long. "I look forward to working closely with you on this project, Brianna." For a breathless moment, she thought he might lean in to kiss her, but instead he took a small step back, maintaining professional distance. "Good night, Oliver," she said, suddenly aware of how much she wished this had been a real date. "Good night. I'll call you tomorrow to set up our next meeting." As she watched him drive away, Brianna sighed. 6 weeks to plan one of the biggest events of her career with a client she was increasingly attracted to. What could possibly go wrong? The next 3 weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. Brianna threw herself into planning the Harrison Gala with an intensity that surprised even her most dedicated employees. The change in date had created numerous challenges, but with Oliver's support and seemingly limitless budget, solutions were found. They met almost daily, sometimes at the museum to discuss the space transformation, sometimes at her office to review vendor proposals, and occasionally for working meals where their professional discussions inevitably drifted into personal territory. With each meeting, Brianna learned more about Oliver, how he secretly funded art programs in underserved schools throughout the city, how he spoke 4 languages from his years managing the company's international offices, how he'd been the one to convince his father to open the museum to the public rather than keeping their collection private. And with each new piece of information, her attraction to him deepened, becoming harder to ignore. For his part, Oliver seemed equally interested in her, asking thoughtful questions about her life and listening intently to her answers. There were moments of lingering touch when passing documents, sustained eye contact across a table, a private joke that made them both laugh when Brianna was certain the attraction was mutual. Yet Oliver maintained a careful professional boundary, never crossing the line into explicitly personal territory. On a Friday afternoon, 3 weeks before the gala, they were in the museum after hours, walking through the grand hall to finalize placement details for the major installations. "The transition archway should go here," Brianna said, marking a spot on the floor with tape. "Guests will walk through it as they move from the past section to the present." Oliver nodded, making notes on his tablet. "What are you envisioning exactly?" "A structure that physically transforms as you walk through it. We'll use a combination of materials that catch and reflect light differently depending on your perspective. From one direction, it looks like classical architecture. From the other, it's completely contemporary." "That's brilliant," Oliver said, looking genuinely impressed. "Did you design it yourself?" Brianna nodded, feeling a flush of pride. "I studied some basic architecture in college. Nothing like what you did, but enough to sketch concepts." "You continue to surprise me, Brianna Lawson," Oliver said softly. Before she could respond, his phone rang. He glanced at it and frowned. "It's my father. I should take this." Brianna nodded and moved away to give him privacy, using the time to take measurements for the lighting installation. She couldn't help overhearing snippets of Oliver's conversation, which seemed to grow increasingly tense. "Yes, Dad, everything is on track. No, I haven't forgotten. That's not fair. It's my decision, not yours. We'll discuss this later." When he hung up, his expression was stormy. He rejoined Brianna, attempting to mask his frustration. "Sorry about that. Where were we? Is everything okay?" Brianna asked carefully. Oliver sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Just my father being my father. He has very specific ideas about how my life should go, professionally and personally." "And you disagree?" "On some important points, yes." He hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "Brianna, there's something I should tell you about this gala." Just then, the museum security guard appeared. "Sorry to interrupt, Mr. Harrison, but we need to lock up the West Wing for the night. The alarm system is being upgraded." The moment was broken. Oliver checked his watch. "It's later than I realized. We should probably call it a day anyway. Can I give you a ride home?" "Actually," Brianna said impulsively, "I was thinking of grabbing dinner. There's a great little Italian place around the corner if you're interested." She immediately wondered if she'd crossed a line. Oliver's expression brightened. "I'd like that very much." The restaurant was small and intimate, with checkered tablecloths and candles in wine bottles. They were seated in a corner booth, the warm lighting and soft music creating an atmosphere that felt decidedly more date-like than their previous meetings. After ordering, Oliver seemed to relax, the tension from his call with his father dissipating. "You were saying something earlier about the gala," Brianna prompted, curious about what he'd been about to tell her. Oliver took a sip of his wine. "It's complicated. Let's just say that beyond the official purpose of honoring my father and the museum's transition, I have personal reasons for wanting this gala to be perfect." "Does it have something to do with what you and your father were disagreeing about?" Brianna asked. "Yes," Oliver admitted. "He has certain expectations about my future that don't align with what I want." Brianna nodded, thinking she understood. "He wants you to follow exactly in his footsteps, but you want to put your own stamp on things." "That's part of it," Oliver agreed, but it's more personal than that. My father thinks it's time I—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Time I settled certain aspects of my personal life." An uncomfortable feeling settled in Brianna's stomach. "Arranged marriages went out of fashion a century ago, didn't they?" she joked weakly. Oliver laughed. "Nothing that extreme, but there are women he considers suitable that he'd prefer I focus my attention on." "I see." Brianna tried to keep her tone neutral despite the disappointment that washed over her. "And do you find these women suitable, I mean?" Oliver's eyes met hers across the table, intense and unwavering. "No, I find myself much more interested in someone my father hasn't had the chance to approve of yet." The air between them seemed to crackle with tension. Brianna's heart pounded as she considered the implications of his words. Was he talking about her? Before she could formulate a response, their food arrived, breaking the moment. They ate, the conversation shifting to safer topics, but Brianna couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just passed between them. As they finished their meal, Oliver insisted on paying despite Brianna's protests. "You can get the next one," he said with a smile that made her pulse quicken. Outside, the temperature had dropped, and Brianna shivered in her light blazer. Without a word, Oliver removed his suit jacket and draped it over her shoulders. "Thank you," she said, acutely aware of his scent surrounding her and the warmth of his hands as they lingered briefly on her shoulders. They walked slowly toward the museum parking lot where they'd left their cars, neither seeming eager for the evening to end. "I had a lovely time tonight," Oliver said as they reached her car. "Beyond the work discussion." "So did I," Brianna admitted. Oliver stepped closer, his expression serious. "Brianna, I know there are professional boundaries here and I respect that, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't attracted to you as more than a client or colleague." Brianna's breath caught. There it was, finally in the open. "I feel the same way," she confessed, "but it complicates things. You're my client, a very important client." "I know," Oliver acknowledged, "and I would never want to jeopardize your professional reputation or the success of this event." He hesitated. "What if we agree to maintain a strictly professional relationship until after the gala? Then, if you're still interested, we could explore whatever this is between us." It was a reasonable compromise, Brianna thought. Just 3 more weeks of professional distance, then they'd be free to pursue their attraction without conflict. "That seems fair," she agreed. Relief and something like joy flashed across Oliver's face. "Good, that's good." He seemed suddenly uncertain, boyishly charming in his awkwardness. Brianna smiled, finding his hesitation endearing after weeks of witnessing his confident business persona. "Good night, Oliver," she said, removing his jacket and handing it back to him, allowing her fingers to brush against his. "Good night, Brianna," he replied, his voice low. As she drove home, Brianna couldn't wipe the smile from her face. Despite the complications, despite the professional risks, she couldn't deny the happiness she felt knowing Oliver Harrison was interested in her. All she had to do was maintain professional boundaries for 3 more weeks, then they could see where this undeniable connection might lead. What she didn't know was that Oliver had much more elaborate plans for their future than a simple first date after the gala. The next 2 weeks were a testament to both their professional dedication and their remarkable self-control. They continued working closely together, but true to their agreement, maintained appropriate boundaries. If their gazes occasionally lingered too long, if their hands sometimes brushed when passing documents, they both pretended not to notice. With just 1 week until the gala, the pace intensified. Brianna was at the museum daily, overseeing the installation of custom fixtures, coordinating with vendors, and handling last-minute changes. Oliver was equally busy, dividing his time between gala preparations and his regular business responsibilities. On Tuesday morning, Brianna was in the museum's grand hall directing the lighting crew when Edward Harrison appeared. It was the first time she'd seen him since their initial meeting, though she'd sent regular updates to his assistant. "Miss Lawson," he greeted her, his sharp eyes taking in the half-completed installations around the room. "How are preparations progressing?" "Very well, Mr. Harrison," Brianna replied confidently. "We're on schedule and under budget. Your son has been incredibly helpful in resolving any issues that have arisen." Edward's expression was unreadable. "Yes, Oliver seems quite invested in this particular gala." He walked slowly around the space, examining the work in progress. "I understand the two of you have been working closely together." Something in his tone made Brianna uncomfortable. "Yes, sir. Oliver has been hands-on with the planning as you requested." Edward stopped and turned to face her directly. "My son is an excellent businessman, Miss Lawson, but he can be impulsive when it comes to personal matters. The Harrison name carries certain responsibilities and expectations." Brianna maintained her professional composure despite the implication of his words. "I assure you, Mr. Harrison, our relationship is strictly professional. My focus is entirely on making this gala a success for the museum." Edward studied her face carefully. "I'm glad to hear it. The museum means everything to me, and eventually it will be Oliver's legacy as well. Distractions would be unfortunate." Before Brianna could respond, a familiar voice called from across the hall, "Dad, I didn't know you were stopping by today." Oliver approached them, his expression carefully neutral though Brianna could sense tension in his shoulders. "Just checking on our investment," Edward replied. "Miss Lawson was updating me on the progress. And does everything meet with your approval?" There was a subtle challenge in Oliver's question. Edward glanced between them. "It appears to be coming along nicely. However, I'd like to discuss some aspects of the guest list with you, privately." "Of course," Oliver agreed. "Brianna, would you excuse us?" "Certainly," she said, grateful for the interruption. "I should check on the florist's delivery anyway." As she walked away, she could feel Edward Harrison's calculating gaze following her. His message had been clear. Whatever might be developing between her and Oliver, he didn't approve. It was a sobering reminder of the reality of their situation. Oliver might find her interesting now, but the son of Edward Harrison was expected to marry someone from his own social circle, not an event planner from Brooklyn. Later that afternoon, Oliver found Brianna in her temporary office at the museum, a converted storage room now filled with plans and samples. "I'm sorry about my father earlier," he said without preamble. "He can be protective of what he considers family interests." Brianna kept her focus on the seating chart in front of her. He made his position quite clear. Oliver moved closer, lowering his voice though they were alone. "His position isn't mine, Brianna. I decide who's important in my life, not him." She finally looked up, struck by the intensity in his expression. "Oliver, your father built an empire that you're set to inherit. I'm just the hired help planning a party. Let's be realistic about the situation." "Is that how you see yourself? The hired help?" Oliver looked genuinely upset by her characterization. "That's how your father sees me," Brianna replied. "And he's not wrong. This is my job, Oliver. A job I'm very good at and have worked incredibly hard to succeed in." Oliver ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "I know that. Your talent and dedication are part of what I admire about you. But there's so much more to you than your job title, just as there's more to me than being Edward Harrison's son." His sincerity was disarming. Brianna found herself wanting to believe that what was growing between them could withstand the reality of their different worlds. "Maybe we should focus on getting through the gala," she suggested. "Then we can figure out whatever this is without the complications of our professional relationship." Oliver looked like he wanted to say more but instead nodded. "You're right. The gala comes first." He hesitated. "But afterward, Brianna, I hope you'll give us a chance regardless of what my father or anyone else thinks." His words stayed with Brianna long after he left. There was something in the way he'd said us, as if he already saw them as a unit, a possibility worth fighting for. It both thrilled and terrified her. The night before the gala, Brianna was still at the museum well past midnight, obsessively checking every detail. The transformation of the Grand Hall was nearly complete and exactly as she'd envisioned, a journey through time and artistic perspective, culminating in a breathtaking installation representing the future of art and connection. "It's perfect," a voice said from behind her. Brianna turned to find Oliver watching her from the entrance, his tie loosened and jacket slung over his shoulder after what must have been a long day. "You should be home resting," he continued, walking toward her. "Tomorrow's the big day." "I could say the same to you," Brianna replied with a tired smile. "What brings you here so late? I wanted to see it completed without the crowds, to appreciate what you've created." He stood beside her, taking in the view. "It's extraordinary, Brianna. Beyond anything I imagined when we started this project." His praise warmed her. "Thank you, but it wasn't just me. Your input and vision shaped everything you see." "We make quite a team," Oliver said softly. "We do," she agreed, acutely aware of how close they were standing, the empty museum quiet around them. Oliver turned to face her. "There's something else I wanted to tell you before tomorrow's chaos." He took a deep breath. "The gala has a special significance for me, beyond what my father knows." "What do you mean?" Brianna asked. "I'm planning to make an announcement tomorrow night, something that will change my relationship with the museum and the company." He seemed to be choosing his words carefully. "It's a decision I've been working toward for years, and tomorrow felt like the right moment." "That sounds significant," Brianna said, curious but not wanting to pry. "Will your father be surprised?" A ghost of a smile crossed Oliver's face. "Let's just say he doesn't know all the details yet." Before she could ask more, Oliver glanced at his watch. "It's nearly 1 in the morning. Let me drive you home. You need at least a few hours of sleep before tomorrow." Too tired to argue, Brianna agreed. They walked together to his car, the city quiet around them. The drive to her apartment was comfortable, both lost in thoughts about the next day. When they arrived, Oliver insisted on walking her to her door. "I want to thank you again for everything you've done," he said as they reached her apartment. "Whatever happens tomorrow, please know that working with you has been the highlight of my year." There was something in his voice, a weight, a significance that made Brianna wonder what exactly he was planning for the gala. "Good night, Oliver," she said softly. "I'll see you tomorrow." "Tomorrow," he echoed, his eyes lingering on hers before he turned to leave. Brianna watched him go, a strange mix of anticipation and anxiety settling in her chest. Tomorrow would be the culmination of weeks of intense work and possibly the beginning of something entirely new. Gala day dawned clear and cold, a perfect December evening in the making. Brianna arrived at the museum at noon, overseeing the final touches and troubleshooting last-minute issues. By 6 o'clock, everything was ready. The museum had been transformed into a spectacular journey through art and time, each section flowing seamlessly into the next, culminating in the breathtaking future installation that seemed to defy physics with its floating elements and interactive light display. Brianna rushed home to change, slipping into the midnight blue gown she'd splurged on for the occasion, an elegant off-shoulder design that made her feel simultaneously powerful and feminine. She typically dressed professionally at events she managed, but tonight felt different, special. When she returned to the museum, guests were already arriving. New York's elite moved through the space in designer gowns and tuxedos, exclaiming over the transformations. Brianna moved efficiently through the crowd, checking that everything was running smoothly while keeping an eye out for Oliver. She spotted Edward Harrison first, holding court near the central bar, looking regal in a classic tuxedo. He acknowledged her with a nod but made no move to speak with her. Minutes later, she finally saw Oliver enter. He was stunning in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo, his presence drawing attention even in this crowd of beautiful people. His eyes scanned the room until they found her, and the smile that lit his face made her heart race. He made his way directly to her, navigating through guests who tried to engage him in conversation. "You look breathtaking," he said when he reached her, his eyes taking in her gown with undisguised appreciation. "Thank you," Brianna replied, fighting a blush. "You clean up pretty well yourself." "Is everything going according to plan?" he asked, glancing around at the packed gallery. "Perfectly," she assured him. "The response has been amazing. People are particularly impressed with the future installation." "Your design," Oliver reminded her. "Your vision." "Our vision," Brianna corrected him. A comfortable silence fell between them, charged with possibilities. "When are you making your announcement?" she asked, remembering their conversation from the night before. "After my father's speech around 9, Oliver replied. "Brianna, there's something I need to tell you before then, Mr. Harrison." A voice interrupted them. "The mayor would like a word when you have a moment." Oliver looked frustrated by the interruption but nodded. "I'll be right there." He turned back to Brianna. "Find me after my father's speech. It's important." "I will," she promised, curious about what seemed to be weighing on him. For the next 2 hours, Brianna was too busy ensuring the event ran smoothly to speak with Oliver again. The dinner service went flawlessly. The entertainment was perfectly timed, and the guests seemed genuinely impressed by the transformations she'd created. From across the room, she occasionally caught Oliver watching her, an unreadable expression on his face. At precisely 9 o'clock, Edward Harrison took the stage that had been set up at one end of the grand hall. The crowd quieted as he began his speech, thanking donors and announcing the museum's record-breaking year. "As many of you know," Edward continued, "this gala marks a transition for the Harrison Museum. After 15 years at the helm, I'll be stepping back from day-to-day operations." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "My son, Oliver, will be taking over as executive director, bringing his unique vision and leadership to this institution we've built together." Applause filled the room. Oliver stepped onto the stage beside his father, shaking his hand in a moment clearly meant for the photographers who captured it from every angle. Edward handed Oliver the microphone, and a hush fell over the crowd again. Brianna watched from near the back of the room, curious about the announcement he'd mentioned. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Oliver began. "This museum has been my father's passion for decades, and I'm honored to carry that legacy forward." He paused, his eyes scanning the crowd until they found Brianna. "But tonight is about more than just a professional transition. It's about new beginnings in every sense." Brianna felt her pulse quicken as Oliver continued. "Some of you may be wondering about the date change for this year's gala. Why move a November tradition to December?" A small smile played on his lips. "The truth is, I had a personal reason for wanting tonight to be special." From his pocket, Oliver produced a small velvet box. Gasps and whispers immediately swept through the crowd. Brianna felt her breath catch, confusion washing over her. Who was he planning to propose to? Brianna Lawson, Oliver said, his voice echoing through the suddenly silent hall. Would you please join me on stage? Brianna froze, certain she'd misheard. Hundreds of faces turned toward her, expectant. On stage, Oliver was looking directly at her, his expression a mixture of hope and vulnerability that she'd never seen before. On shaking legs, Brianna made her way through the parting crowd. As she climbed the steps to the stage, she was acutely aware of Edward Harrison's thunderous expression and the curious murmurs of the guests. "Oliver, what are you doing?" she whispered as she reached him. He took her hand, his touch steadying her. "Something I've wanted to do since the moment I saw you in my father's office." Speaking into the microphone again, he addressed the crowd. "Most of you don't know that Brianna is the brilliant mind behind tonight's transformations. What you also don't know is that she's transformed me these past 6 weeks in ways I never expected." Brianna's mind raced. 6 weeks. They'd barely known each other that long. This couldn't be happening. "Brianna," Oliver continued, turning to face her directly, "I know this seems sudden. Crazy even, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life." He dropped to one knee, still holding her hand. "From our first conversation, I knew you were special. The way your mind works, your creativity, your kindness, your integrity, everything about you captivated me." Brianna was vaguely aware of camera flashes, and the collective held breath of hundreds of New York's elite. But all she could focus on was Oliver's face, earnest and vulnerable as he looked up at her. "I had this elaborate plan," he continued, "to court you properly after the gala to show you how serious I am about us. But life's too short for games or arbitrary timelines. I love you, Brianna Lawson. Will you marry me?" The room spun around her. This couldn't be real. They hadn't even been on a proper date, yet the sincerity in Oliver's eyes was unmistakable. "Oliver," she managed, her voice barely audible even with the microphone, "we've known each other 6 weeks. We've never even kissed. This is insane." A flicker of amusement crossed his face. "The never kissed part we can remedy immediately," he said, his voice low enough that the microphone didn't catch it. "As for the rest, sometimes you just know, I've never been more certain of anything." From the corner of her eye, Brianna could see Edward Harrison's rigid posture, his expression a mask of controlled fury. The crowd waited in tense silence for her response. "I can't," she began, then paused, gathering her thoughts. "Oliver, I care about you so much, but this is too fast. We need time. I need time." Disappointment flashed across his face, but he nodded, rising to his feet. "Time," he repeated, still holding her hand. "I can work with that." Then, leaning closer to the microphone, he addressed the crowd again. "Ladies and gentlemen, it seems I've moved a bit too quickly for this remarkable woman, but I'm nothing if not persistent." Nervous laughter rippled through the audience. Oliver turned back to Brianna. "Will you at least consider a proper date? No proposal, no pressure. Just dinner and a chance to explore what we might become together." The sincerity in his eyes melted her resistance. "Yes," she said simply, "I'd like that." Relief and joy transformed Oliver's face. Without warning, he pulled her into his arms and, mindless of the hundreds of watching eyes, kissed her. It was a perfect first kiss, tender yet passionate, a promise of everything that might be possible between them. When they finally separated, the room erupted in applause and cheers. Even through her daze, Brianna noticed Edward Harrison exiting through a side door, his disapproval evident in every line of his rigid posture. The remainder of the gala passed in a blur. Oliver remained by Brianna's side, his hand rarely leaving hers as they navigated congratulations, curious questions, and knowing smiles from the guests. To her surprise, most people seemed charmed by the unexpected romance, treating it as the highlight of the social season rather than the professional catastrophe she'd initially feared. Near midnight, as the last guests were departing, Oliver led Brianna to a quiet corner of the museum, away from the staff who were beginning the cleanup process. "I owe you an explanation," he said, taking both her hands in his, "and an apology for putting you on the spot like that. You think?" Brianna replied, but there was no real anger in her voice. She was still too stunned by the evening's events to summon proper indignation. Oliver smiled ruefully. "I had this whole plan. The date change, the theme of transitions, it was all building to tonight. I wanted to show you how serious I am about us. By proposing in front of hundreds of people before we'd even gone on a date," Brianna asked incredulously. "When you put it that way, it does sound a bit dramatic," Oliver admitted. "But I've never felt this way about anyone, Brianna. From that first day in my father's office, something just clicked. The more time we spent together, the more certain I became. But 6 weeks, Oliver. 6 weeks isn't enough time to decide to spend your life with someone." "My parents got engaged after knowing each other for 3 weeks," Oliver countered. "They were married for 35 years and were deliriously happy until my mother's death." Brianna sighed. "That's different. Different era, different circumstances." "Is it?" Oliver challenged gently. "Or are we just conditioned to believe that love should follow a certain timeline? Sometimes you just know, Brianna. I know. I've known since our dinner at Lawrence." His certainty was both terrifying and exhilarating. Brianna had never been one for fairy tales or whirlwind romances, but there was something about Oliver Harrison that made her question everything she thought she knew about love and timing. "What about your father?" she asked, remembering Edward's angry exit. Oliver's expression hardened slightly. "My father will adjust. He had his chance at love. I won't let him dictate mine. He clearly has someone else in mind for you. Yes, the daughter of his oldest friend. Practically grew up together, impeccable bloodlines, the perfect merger of family fortunes." Oliver rolled his eyes. "She's also engaged to a woman she's been in love with since college, which my father conveniently ignores." Despite everything, Brianna laughed. "So not a viable option then?" "Not remotely," Oliver agreed, his expression softening. "Look, I know tonight didn't go as I planned. But I meant every word, Brianna. I'm in love with you, and I'm willing to take as much time as you need to prove it to you." The sincerity in his eyes was impossible to doubt. Brianna felt something shift inside her, a willingness to consider possibilities she'd never imagined before. "How about we start with that date?" she suggested. "A real date where we're not discussing centerpieces or guest lists." Oliver's smile was radiant. "I think that can be arranged." He pulled her closer. "But first, I believe we were interrupted earlier." This time when their lips met, there was no audience, no pressure, just the two of them exploring the connection that had been building for weeks. Brianna melted into him, all her doubts temporarily suspended by the rightness of being in his arms. When they finally parted, Oliver rested his forehead against hers. "For the record," he murmured, "that was worth waiting 6 weeks for." Brianna laughed softly. "I'll concede that point." She stepped back, needing some distance to clear her head. "But I'm serious about taking things slower, Oliver. If there's really something special between us, it will still be there in a few months or a year." "I know," Oliver nodded. "And I'll wait, though I hope it doesn't take a year for you to agree to marry me." "One step at a time, Harrison," Brianna warned, though she couldn't help smiling. As they walked hand in hand through the now empty museum, surrounded by the magical environment they'd created together, Brianna found herself wondering if maybe, just maybe, Oliver was right. Perhaps sometimes you really do just know. In the weeks that followed, Oliver proved true to his word. Their first official date was a private picnic on the roof of the museum, where Oliver had created a small magical garden complete with twinkling lights and a view of the city skyline. Their second was a surprise cooking class where they laughed their way through making pasta from scratch. Each date revealed new layers of connection between them, confirming what they'd both sensed from the beginning: there was something rare and precious growing between them. Edward Harrison remained a complication. After the gala, he had summoned Oliver to a tense meeting where he made his disapproval abundantly clear. But Oliver stood firm, refusing to let his father's expectations dictate his heart. It created strain between them, but Oliver was confident that eventually Edward would come to see what he saw in Brianna. For her part, Brianna's career flourished in the aftermath of the Harrison Gala. Far from damaging her professional reputation, Oliver's public declaration had made her the most sought-after event planner in the city. Everyone wanted the woman who had not only transformed the Harrison Museum, but had also captured the heart of New York's most eligible bachelor. 3 months after the gala, Oliver took Brianna to dinner at Lawrence, where they'd had their first real conversation outside of work. After dessert, he reached across the table for her hand. "I've been thinking," he began. "A dangerous pastime," Brianna teased. "I know." Oliver smiled. "But hear me out. These past 3 months have been the happiest of my life, Brianna. Every day I spend with you confirms what I knew that night at the gala, that you're the person I want to build a life with." Brianna felt her heart rate quicken. "Oliver, no, don't worry. I'm not about to drop to one knee again," he assured her. "At least not tonight, but I do have a proposition for you." "I'm listening," Brianna said cautiously. "My lease is up next month, and I've been looking at houses in Brooklyn Heights. There's one on Orange Street with a garden and a view of the Manhattan skyline that I think you'd love." He paused, watching her face carefully. "I'm wondering if you might consider looking at it with me, as a potential home for us." "You want us to move in together," Brianna clarified. "Yes." Oliver squeezed her hand. "I know it's another big step, but I think we're ready. Don't you?" Brianna considered his question seriously. 3 months earlier, she would have thought moving in with someone after such a short time was crazy. But these months with Oliver had shown her that sometimes the heart knows what the mind takes time to accept. What they had was real and solid and worth taking chances for. "Yes," she said finally, a smile spreading across her face. "I think we are." The joy in Oliver's expression was all the confirmation she needed that she'd made the right choice. A week later, they toured the house on Orange Street together. It was everything Oliver had described: a historic brownstone with modern updates, a private garden, and a rooftop terrace with breathtaking views of Manhattan. As they stood on that terrace, the spring sunshine warm on their faces, Oliver wrapped his arms around Brianna from behind. "Could you see us here?" he asked, his chin resting on her shoulder. Building a life together, Brianna leaned back against him, feeling a sense of rightness that had become familiar in his presence. "Yes," she said simply. "I can." 2 days later, Oliver made an offer on the house. A week after that, it was accepted. What Brianna didn't know was that on the same day, Oliver visited a jeweler in the Diamond District, commissioning a custom engagement ring, an emerald-cut diamond flanked by smaller sapphires that matched the color of Brianna's eyes. He tucked it away, patient now in his certainty that when the time was right, Brianna would be ready to say yes. The morning they were to sign the final papers for the house, Oliver received an unexpected call from his father's assistant. Edward had suffered a mild heart attack and was in the hospital. Brianna immediately went with Oliver, supporting him through the frightening hours of waiting and uncertainty. When they were finally allowed to see Edward, Brianna hung back, giving father and son privacy. To her surprise, after a few minutes, Oliver beckoned her into the room. Edward Harrison looked diminished against the white hospital sheets, his usual commanding presence softened by illness. He regarded Brianna with tired eyes as she approached the bed. "Miss Lawson," he acknowledged. "It seems I owe you an apology." Brianna exchanged a confused glance with Oliver, who nodded encouragingly. "My son tells me you've been instrumental in his happiness these past months," Edward continued, "and that I've been less than welcoming." "There's no need to," Brianna began, but Edward raised a hand to stop her. "There is every need," he insisted. "I've been so focused on what I thought was best for Oliver and for the Harrison legacy that I failed to see what was right in front of me, a woman of intelligence, talent, and character who loves my son for himself, not his name or fortune." Tears pricked at Brianna's eyes as Edward reached for her hand. "My wife would have adored you," he said quietly. "She always said our son needed someone who would challenge him, not just adore him. I should have remembered that." "Thank you, Mr. Harrison," Brianna said, genuinely moved by his words. "That means a great deal to me." "Edward, please," he corrected her. "We're family now, or soon will be if I know my son at all." Oliver moved to stand beside Brianna, his arm slipping around her waist. "Actually, Dad, we're signing papers on a house today, in Brooklyn Heights." A smile creased Edward's tired face. "Good, that's good." He looked between them. "Don't waste time like I did, waiting for the right moment for happiness. My Catherine used to say that life gives us a limited number of perfect days. Make sure you seize every one of them." It was the closest thing to a blessing they could have hoped for. As they left the hospital later that afternoon, Oliver seemed lighter despite the worry about his father's health. "That was unexpected," Brianna said as they walked to the car. "Not entirely," Oliver admitted. "Dad and I had a long talk last week after he met us for dinner. He didn't say anything at the time, but I could tell he was starting to see what I see in you." "And what's that?" Brianna asked playfully. Oliver stopped walking, turning to face her. "Everything," he said simply. "My perfect match in every way that matters." Later that day, after signing the papers that made the brownstone officially theirs, they celebrated with champagne on what would soon be their rooftop terrace. As the sun began to set over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Oliver reached into his pocket. "I know we agreed to take things one step at a time," he began. "But my father was right about one thing: life gives us only so many perfect moments." Brianna's breath caught as Oliver lowered himself to one knee, producing the velvet box she'd first seen at the gala months earlier. "This isn't in front of hundreds of people," he said with a small smile. "Just us, at the beginning of our new home together. Brianna Lawson, I've loved you since the moment you walked into my father's office and spoke about events that tell stories. Will you marry me and let me help write the next chapters of our story together?" This time, there was no hesitation in Brianna's heart. "Yes," she said, tears of joy spilling down her cheeks. "Yes, I'll marry you." As Oliver slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, just like everything between them, Brianna marveled at the journey that had brought them here. From planning a museum gala to planning a life together, all in the space of a few months. Sometimes, it seemed, the heart really does know what the mind takes time to accept. And sometimes, the most unexpected transitions lead to the most beautiful beginnings. 6 months later, Brianna and Oliver were married in the garden of their Brooklyn Heights home, with only their closest friends and family in attendance. Edward Harrison, fully recovered and beaming with pride, walked Brianna down the aisle to where Oliver waited beneath an arch of flowers reminiscent of the transition archway from the gala, where their story had truly begun. As they exchanged vows, promising to build a life of love and partnership, Brianna reflected on how a simple job planning a museum gala had transformed into the greatest adventure of her life. She hadn't known then that the billionaire son was planning not just his father's celebration, but the beginning of their forever. And as Oliver sealed their vows with a kiss, both knew with absolute certainty that this was just the first of many perfect days they would create together.